Now available on Kickstarter, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this all-new Kickstarter exclusive John Haynes comic book. Put in your pledge and get the standard, variant, or retro covers of John Haynes at Death's Door and other great stretch goal rewards on Kickstarter today. The 4th of July, and many Americans are celebrating their independence with the exception of unvaccinated New York City residents. Over 1 million New Yorkers aren't able to celebrate their independence by being able to go to work because Mayor Eric Adams has an vaccine mandate on the private sector, preventing New Yorkers who are unvaccinated from being able to go to work. Now, this policy is supposedly not even being enforced, but this mandate still remains on the books of the Adams administration. And this policy optically really looks bad for your Eric Adams and his political party, because on July 4th, the day we celebrate our independence, he is restricting the freedoms of New York City residents to go out here and make a living. Now, what's really troubling about this policy is that the mayor is not even enforcing this policy, but he's allowing this mandate to remain on the books, and this policy is the only one in the country and even the entire world that is restricting 1 million people from being able to make a living. Now, this whole policy makes no logical sense because an unvaccinated entertainer or an athlete can work in New York City, and even some members of law enforcement are getting a pass from the mayor due to a shortage of officers due to a lot of retirements and turnover. However, anybody else who is looking to work in the private sector here in New York City, they can't go out here and work due to this mayor making a unilateral mandate that prevents New Yorkers from being able to go to work. And what's really ridiculous about this policy, again, is that it's not even being enforced. So if the policy is not being enforced, then why is it on the books? That is the critical question most people are asking regarding this mandate, because with the state being in a budget deficit and the city being in a budget deficit, this policy, all it does is hinder New York's economy from recovering from the pandemic, because every unvaccinated New Yorker that remains out of work is someone who isn't able to go out here and work and contribute to city and state taxes, and this is taking revenue straight out of New York State's economy. So this policy, which impacts over 1 million people, is actually detrimental to the city. Unfortunately, your mayor, Eric Adams, cannot really think critically about how he is hurting the city with this policy, because he's too caught up in his feelings about this, about whatever this policy is, that he's not thinking critically about the long-term impact of this policy on New York State's economy and New York City's economy. And he's not looking at how optically bad this whole policy is to remain in place on July 4th, because to have this policy in place on July 4th that restricts the freedom of New Yorkers, this really runs detrimental to our Constitution, where people are supposed to be guaranteed a right to a life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness under our United States Constitution. Now, I find it interesting that the Supreme Court told us that vaccine mandates were unconstitutional and basically voided the policy in January, but here in New York, this private sector vaccine mandate has been allowed to remain in place, even though the U.S. Supreme Court has stated that it's unconstitutional, and the mayor has not even enforced the policy or even sent out agents to enforce the policy. So this is really a really troubling situation, because it shows that nobody is leading as related to New York City, and nobody's taking responsibility for a policy that is harming the city's economy, destroying the lives of 1 million people, and keeping 1 million people out of work. Nobody is wanting to take responsibility for this policy that has really disrupted the lives of many working class New Yorkers and restricted them from having their rights under the United States Constitution to go out here and work and make a living. Because it's really, as I see it, reprehensible to continue to enforce, to have a policy on the books that prevents New Yorkers from being able to make a living, whereas this policy is not even on the books in every part of the United States, only in New York City. And again, this makes your Eric Adams look optically bad for enforcing a policy that is hindering the lives of New Yorkers, and it makes his party optically look bad to enforce a policy that oppresses a million people, because we are in a state of inflation. The economy is struggling, and you are impeding the lives of New Yorkers to make a living. So this policy being on the books on July 4th is an embarrassment to your Mayor Eric Adams, and it's an embarrassment to the party that he is a part of. And sadly, nobody in that party, from Joe Biden to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, can look at how optically bad this policy is and how it's going to hurt his party come November, and how it's affecting them right now, because this policy basically makes it look like those on the left really don't care about New Yorkers, really don't care about New Yorkers making a living, and do not really care about the optics of the situation, which makes it look like you really don't want to follow the United States Constitution, you don't want to follow the policies of the U.S. Supreme Court, and you want to go out here and keep a policy on the books that you're not even enforcing, all out of basically spite for those who refuse to take a shot, which is their constitutional right. And this policy, again, just shows how petty your Eric Adams is being regarding many New Yorkers who need to make a living and are actually going to help him if they could make a living. Because if you're in a budget crunch where you're making austerity measures, you need every tax dollar to make revenue. And every unvaccinated New Yorker that stays out of work, that takes revenue away from the city, and you're losing billions of dollars practically every day, basically because of feelings. And that really shows how your Eric Adams is not really thinking about the big picture, because he's thinking about his feelings about getting back at people for not taking a shot for this jab. That's what this whole policy looks like, and it's a completely backwards frame of thinking, and it's really hurting most New Yorkers. It's hurting New York's economy. It's preventing a million people from working, and it may eventually wind up leading to many New Yorkers voting red for the first time in New York City's history. So this is not a good policy on the books. And again, as we celebrate our independence, unvaccinated New Yorkers don't have that freedom to go out here and be able to make a living. And that just really shows how out of touch many on the left are about the Constitution of this country, which is supposed to give us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the ability to pursue making a living. But we don't see how we're impeding people's rights under the Constitution. And what's really hypocritical is that these same people will say, oh, abortion rights are health care, but a man's right or a woman's right to make a living isn't health care at all. The greatest health care people can have is the ability to make a living, and an unvaccinated New Yorker has a right to make a living in New York City. They have that constitutional right guaranteed to them by the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's time that your Americans in New York City start standing up for those unvaccinated New Yorkers and allow them to make the living that they can make in the rest of the country. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box, because this video will not be monetized. And if you could pick up some of the books on the SJS Direct imprint, that would be greatly appreciated. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle, Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Learn how to avoid predatory females like Instagram models and e-girls in their virtual con games with Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Get your copy of Stop Simping in Cyberspace in paperback and Kindle today.